So as our next speaker is getting set up here, Charlene Stokes, who joined MITRE like 2 weeks ago from...
This is 3 weeks now.
3 weeks, going on 3 weeks, from AFRL.
I have to say, as excited as I am to do the capture the flag, Misha, I think I will fail miserably because, as you will learn as I talk, I get very excited and I am very loud. So yeah, it's trying to control for somebody like me is going to be a challenge. Okay, so let me make sure this is working. I'm a big preference for this thing. I move around a lot. So anyway, I definitely wanted to say thank you to John for organizing this and coming up with this idea to kind of bring these worlds together. And also a huge thanks to Marissa, who I know was a huge help to you, John, and especially because you're doing that on your personal time. So thank you very much. It's very much appreciated. Other thanks, which it seems like they left. Oh, no, Joyce is there. Huge thanks to Joyce and Tom, of course, for the tremendous support. Joyce, just again, just like Marissa, kind of, oh, we'll just get you snacks. We got that covered. No worries. So thank you very much for that. And again, really, for those of you that might be residents here, Mass Robotics has been a tremendous resource, and I'm really, really so glad we decided to come here. This was a decision I made back, again, 3 weeks now at MITRE. Formerly with Air Force Research Labs, but I've been with Mass Robotics, again, kind of tracking them, and Tom was really great for about a year now, really tracking them, waiting for them to get this space, and they finally got it, and as soon as they did, we made sure we were some of their first residents, and it has been paying dividends ever since. Again, the tremendous support, the tremendous connections, really great opportunity. So anybody that is interested in looking for any kind of residency or all the things that Joyce mentioned, please definitely follow up with them. Highly recommend it. Okay, so unlike Misha, I did also get my bachelor's degree in psychology, and I decided to stick with it, but you can still play with robots, okay? So I just come at it from a very different perspective. If you want to read that, what I always say a quote, but I guess it's more a motto that Marissa and I kind of came up with, developing and managing the unique relationships for future quantified warriors and their machine partners. And if you understand that, where I'm saying the human-machine teams, but the social frontier, and managing those unique relationships. So that's what we're trying to tackle. We're trying to understand it not just from the design perspective. We have all these great minds here, right, that can understand and kind of feed into the design perspective. But we're coming at it from a different angle. And the reason I'm coming at it from that different angle is because my training, again, sticking with the psychology, is actually I got my PhD in industrial organizational psychology. And what does that mean for some of you folks that don't know? I did have a dual program. I did human factors psychology and industrial organizational psychology. But with my focus in the IO world, it's very much on teams and team effectiveness and all this world. So as you might imagine, when this whole notion of human-machine teams came around, I was like, I happen to know a lot about teams. So it very much intrigued me. And again, we really want to bring it back to what we can do for managing that relationship, not just on the technology side, but on the human side as well. And so that's the question that we're trying to ask. The work you're going to be seeing here today, again, I'm at MITRE, been MITRE for 3 weeks, but again, much of the work has been a research program because I have been with AFRL for 12 years. So a lot of that's thanks to them and support by them, but it's really these folks that you see here that have really done the hard work. Very much a team person myself, outside of just trying to understand how they function. I try to live that. So again, Monica and Marissa, I can't thank you guys enough for everything that you have done. And then we've got some great support from Accreta. Again, these were not just my contractors, so I wasn't just paying them to do work for me. We had Accreta with them, and they were a tremendous team and really gave their all these folks you see here listed on the Lockheed side. And then some, when we were at Yale for the last 5 years, some great support we had there. So again, thanks to them for the work you're going to see today especially. So some of you out in MITRE world, I hope there's a lot of folks tuning in hopefully. I'm learning that that's how everybody seems to attend meetings at MITRE. They kind of do this virtually, so hopefully there's a lot there. Most of you probably know about the third offset strategy, but for those few folks that are here, either from Mass Robotics or MIT, although you guys are funded by DARPA and ONR, so you probably know this too. These third offset strategies are huge. Obviously, there's only been 3 in our entire nation's history. First one, nuclear deterrence. As you might imagine, that's had a tremendous impact on our world, not just our nation, but our world. Second one, we can summarize it as technology superiority, right? So what did that mean? How did that affect our world? So for example, it's not just defense, but it trickles out to the defense funding world, which trickles out to the DARPAs, trickles out to the universities, and then there's all this influence that goes on. Essentially, we'll just boil this one down to one of the big ones that came around from the second offset was GPS, right? DARPA trickling down and funding and that exploding. And we see things like the autonomous car kind of explosion, which again came pretty much from one of DARPA's challenges earlier. So this third offset's coming along, right? I get excited because it kind of lined up with the work I've been doing in trust and autonomous systems for 12 years, so that was great for me. But what I noticed right away is some of the pillars that work announced were human-machine collaboration, unmanned-manned combat teaming, as if those are easy things to do. Collaboration and teaming are incredibly social aspects, and then that component of it is completely being neglected. Not saying that it's not important to create the capability and the technology itself, but we want to understand the other side as well. And again, that's what we hope to be able to bring to the table, to work with the folks that are developing the great capabilities, and that's one reason we're here at Mass Robotics. Again, to work with those great technologies, but again, we're kind of coming in and trying to ask some of those, what can we do on the human side to improve this true teaming or true collaboration? So again, it requires social emotional skills, and what I present in our studies today, you'll see a little bit more why I highlight so much the social emotional part of it. Not just because I'm a very emotional person and really excited, but obviously I exist, right? Someone like me exists out there, and we have to understand how we're interacting, right? So our objective, just in general, is really trying to understand those social cognitive underpinnings that are existing, because again, we are social emotional beings. We use emotion to inform our decision making. We're processing it on an emotional level every second, every day of our interaction. There's a reason we have those emotions, whether it be a steady affect, whether it be high emotions, and we can get into emotion theory offline if you want. But again, there's a purpose, right? It's there, it has survived, and it informs our decision making, whether we want it to sometimes or not. So that's what I want to understand in this human-machine teaming space. And I specifically want to pull in, again, my background in IO psychology, which I did focus on motivation and training theory, so I very much want to try to pull that into this space. How do we motivate? How do we train the war fighters for me, the users for other people? How do we start thinking about how these people are engaging with these systems from the beginning, and what can we do to get them ready for that? What can we do to get them potentially more accepting, more trusting, less trusting, depending on what we want there? On the commercial side, for the Mass Robotics residents here, that usually gets bared out in the markets, right? Some marketing literature and some marketing science goes out there and does a lot of their own physio work. You should see the P&G lab that they have set up with eye tracking and everything, trying to understand those exact things. Again, what are those social cues? What emotions? What's leading? If you're placing it here, if it's colored this way. Again, instead of waiting for that on the defense side, we have to understand some of those, because it comes down to life or death. So again, the largely unconscious social affective cues are what we're looking at, and we do certainly see that as a wide and critical gap. Again, in 12 years of doing trust and autonomy research, I've recognized that and have been studying the relationship between trust and affect, or trust and emotion, and that's just going to become more and more important, not only obviously because of third offset and all the trickle-down effect of the powerhouse of government funding that's going to influence, but just everything that's happening in the commercial sector with Alexa, for example. The Amazon Echo. I have one of those in my house, and as a mother of a 4- and 6-year-old, they are interacting with Alexa just like she's, again, really like she's part of the family. They'll ask her questions, they'll do all kinds of stuff, right? And how's that interaction space happening, right? They're just growing up that way. So how is that influencing us as we move forward? So here's, again, to your point, Misha, definitely on the physiological side, right? It's important for two reasons. It's key for that perceptual system of the machine, right? That machine needs that data from the human. If it's going to be a teammate, it needs to know something about its human partner. What's the best way to truly know that? Because I'm going to pick up so many signals from you, from Marissa, I'll say from, again, when I'm processing this, that aren't just everything she's telling me, and maybe she's not telling me some things, or maybe she's lying to, oh no, I'm okay today, whatever, right? But I know, right? So again, the physiological side, all the biometrics, right? That's going to be a really, really important piece for that perceptual system, for the machine to have its perceptual system. What we're interested in is simulating that intelligent partner, right? Again, because we see AI going that way, for an intelligent machine partner to have that, we see it going that way, that all this data is going to be collected. Quantified warrior, right? Quantified self, quantified warrior for us. But how are users feeling and responding to that much more intimate coupling with these systems, right? I think that's an important question, and that's easily being glossed over it. So again, that's something that we're trying to tackle and trying to understand it from that perspective. So I know you probably cannot see this at all, but there's really two main things to highlight, really just the yellow portions here, right? So this is some great work that we've published and put out there, because again, as a fundamental scientist and trying to understand the theory and build up the theory, we've developed a conceptual framework for how we want to understand this human-machine social systems that we believe they are. And the blue, and I don't know if this works. Oh, no, it doesn't work on that. In the blue side, we've got technical skills on the machine and the human side, and individual characteristics on the machine and the human side. Again, these are important, but where we're focusing in our research program, or we have been, and hope to continue to do so, is on the team process skills. Again, how do we get both sides, right? Not just the capability of the system, the design information for the system itself, but how do we get the user ready for that? So what it lists out there in team process skills, some variables we're interested in: communication, collaboration, cohesion, rapport, and team management. And how do we plan to tackle those? That's what you see down here in this yellow box. Step one, human-machine selection and training. And again, pulling in my IO background there, how do we select for and train for people that are optimally going to work with these systems a little bit better? And then the climate management, the continuous kind of, and this again goes right back to the physiological sensors. If a machine partner, like in the loyal wingman, there's some sensing happening that they're stressed, how do we augment that behavior? How did the machine step in at that moment, just like you'd expect a real human teammate to do? So emotion management skill training. That's another piece, again, on Marissa and I met Marissa. She started working on our team at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, so we're both very steeped in emotion theory and understanding the importance of that, and really finding how critical that emotion management is in high stress scenarios. And as you might imagine, in the military, there are a lot of high stress scenarios. So we really see that as one of the key things that we can focus on. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take you through two studies. The first one, study one here, that occurred in the lab when we were at Yale. Again, university students. We had some great results. As I stepped through this, though, just to highlight, there's a reason I wanted to pull out of the lab and come in to start using with more real-world technologies and kind of what's out there. Again, what are we seeing in the lab? Is that generalizing out to the real world and get closer to those end users? So here what we have is a basic, again, here's my manipulation, here's what I focused on, is how we introduce the system. So again, how we focus on the training, if you will, but including in the training is just some basic framing, some basic social framing of how we're even introducing those systems, right? So here we said, we framed it as, it's in the experiment condition, as an empathetic partner focus. They go through some various team building skills, and again, it's really emphasizing that social fabric that underlies most interactions for us as humans, whether we like to admit it or not. Control condition, tool focus, yoke control task. Again, this is typically how things are introduced, right? Here's some great decision aid system, and it's going to help you in your task, and here's how it works, and that's about where it ends. And then it gets put on the shelf soon after, at least. That's what we often say. So again, we were just really basic kind of trying to highlight that social focus and just some simple framing manipulation. Everything that happened, as you can see there, same ISR, and for those that don't know, ISR is my former group in intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, so the analysts of the world, right? So what are the analysts doing? This was, the participant in this was pretending to be an analyst that had to rate various threats, and kept either the computer empathetic partner or the computer enhanced program would aid them in that and make various recommendations. So here are some of our self-report measures. We do have some physiological measures as well. We had eye tracking, EEG, and EDA, but GSR, same thing. We still need to analyze some of that data, so I like your idea of kind of opening it up and putting it out there. for some folks to look at the physio data. So one of the things I found really hard, and I don't know if Misha, if you've come up against this, but again, when I kind of got into this world, I was so excited of this whole sense, assess, augment loop that we call it anyway, and at the Air Force, where you want to sense this, you want to assess what does it really mean, and then augment that behavior in real time, right? But to get from that sense, we can collect all this great data, but to the assess, what does that data mean? Am I really stressed? That's a lot of noise, and that's right now happens with so much post-processing. I keep trying to convince DARPA to take this challenge on because we need to close that loop in real time, and so far nobody's really doing it. So anyway, we still have to rely on our self-report measures and some behavioral measures. So here are our main ones, and again, I know you probably can't see some of those, but we look at trust propensity, and I do very much kind of to clarify my kind of theory of trust, I do define trust as an acceptance of vulnerability. It's an attitude versus trustworthiness, which is maybe how I feel of people out there. I'll judge your trustworthiness by, there's various models, ability, benevolence, integrity, what have you. Again, that's different than my trust, my ultimate judgment of trust. And then my trust propensity, more dispositional, right? More my personality. What am I bringing in that's kind of flavoring that? So those three main constructs, right, are areas how I kind of view trust, which is different than reliance. And you'll see in a moment in our results why that's so important. So that's what you see right there. Some of our examples of trust. Physiological reliance was the different score based on agreement with KEP's rankings, right? So did you follow up with what KEP was ultimately recommending you to do, or did you not? Coping. How able are you to handle the demands of this task? Now note, this asks nothing about KEP. It just asks about the task at hand that you're performing. And then the other one, again, was created, it was very much exploratory for what we were doing here. Again, going back to that intimate coupling that we're seeing on the horizon of we're all going to be hooked up, especially with pilots. I know that that's the way they're going, is with the loyal wingman especially, is to hook them up and get all this great human data, as they call it, off of them. Well, how do we feel about that? How is that changing that dynamic, that interaction in ways that we might not even be aware of? And before I move on to, I like this. I know what's coming up now. The reason I say, and I really want to emphasize that what we aren't aware of is because this great series of work by Clifford Nass, who unfortunately passed away right when we got on a program to be able to work with him at NSF. He unfortunately passed away, but his work really did inspire me, and it was just a series of work showing, it was the 90s even, 90s into the early 2000s. If you put one example, again, there was a tremendous examples, tons of studies. If you put a colored armband on and then you color a desktop computer with a matching color or a disparate color, how they performed with that, how they relied on that, and playing some basic computer-based tasks, all these tremendous variables were impacted just simply because of that minor social cue. Okay, so again, the interesting thing though about that is when he asked them in the exit interviews, would you treat this system any differently for X, Y, or Z? No, of course not. No, never would. But yet they did, right? So what we acknowledge and what we think we're going to do you trust would you yell at your iPod or iPod, do those exist anymore? iPhone or what have you. Again, what we consciously say, we don't think but we will do, and we don't realize that because, again, it's that social cueing. We are social emotional beings that's getting cued. It's informing our reactions, whether we realize it or not. So here, some of the stress and the coping ability in particular, really interesting results. Again, for this pretty minor study, I think we had 43 participants. Their perceived ability to cope with the stress of the task at hand was higher in that teammate control group, just because we said, KEP is your computer empathetic partner, went through some social kind of dialogue, and again had that cue, that social kind of context for them. They already perceived they could cope with that task that they were doing, that ISR threat rank task, better than in the control group when we said, here, KEP's going to help you out with this task, and the ratings that KEP would give were the exact same across these conditions, and it was between subjects. Here's the really interesting one. And I've been kind of saying this in a lot of the trust and community for a while, and the trust and autonomy community in particular pretty much, remember how I said there's a distinction between trust and trustworthiness? They kind of just assume that trustworthiness is trust. Okay, is it Can I predict? Is it reliable? Again, check all these boxes that are really trustworthiness. But then they assess it that way, and they don't come back then and see if my attitude, right, my perception is the same. And for a quick example for why it might not be, right, maybe I don't trust you, but my workload is so off the charts that I'm just going to have to rely on you anyway, right? But here, what I find fascinating about these results, what you see there with the nice slope is the experiment condition. So we presented it as kept as a teammate. And then on the straight line is the control group, where we presented it as a tool. So what we see happening here is that nice linear relationship that we assume is the case, right? That if I say I trust, then I also rely. We're not seeing that in the tool condition, and that speaks to some of the conflicting results we've seen in the trust and autonomy literature, where sometimes they're relying, sometimes they're not. And what's the difference here? And that's why I get excited about this one, because it's cueing that social fabric, right? Trust is a social variable. Trust is something that we do as social beings evolving and learning what we can trust and what we can't in those social dynamics. So when that social underlying fabric gets cued in people, then that's going to bring that dynamic a little bit closer. And so that's what we see here. And again, this was exploratory, but really even with these very basic questions that we developed for this study, we already saw a significant difference in how they perceived that the sensors enabled KEP to understand, help, and support them more, all because of what we said, that how we introduced that system versus just giving them the system, showing them how it worked. So we wanted to move on to study 2. Those were lab students, Yale students at that, so we can't really generalize too far beyond that group, right? So we wanted to see, how does this happen in the real world? That's one of the things I'm always trying to push for, is get out there in the field and try to understand, what is this going to generalize out there? So we were very fortunate. The Air Force has this annual exercise called Tech Warrior, where it's a 10-day exercise, and they bring folks in, and they have to live out there. They're in these tents, and it sets up this base defense scenario at this great area called Calamityville, which I know, it's crashed planes, they blow things up, they flood things. It's really great. It's for also rescue training and all kinds of, not just military training, but all kinds of folks get sent out there to this area to receive training on disaster areas. So that's why it's called Calamityville. So anyway, they do this every year, and I was like, oh, I want to kind of do a study. They're like, what? What's this? What's a study? I was like, no, I'm not just testing technologies. I have an empirical question that I want to ask on these technologies that some of you are using, and some potential future technologies. So what this PED is more the ISR world, more the analyst world here again. So processing, exploitation, and dissemination just means processing a lot of data, coming in, turning it into information to get it out to the boots on the ground, right? So what you might imagine an analyst does, collect all this data, and they have to send it out to the people in the field for them to make decisions or to inform them. So again, that's a typical scenario that happens at this Tech Warrior every year. Again, it's a base defense scenario. There's a PED cell, the analyst kind of sitting in a room, collecting all this visual information from, this year they did have drones flying, and they had lots of other sensors happening. The analysts have to collect that information and then send it out to the guys with machine guns out there, but of course they didn't really fire. But it's still a pretty neat scenario. That was the picture that you saw actually in the first one with us, with the tanks in the middle. So in the PED cell, typically it's 5 people in a PED cell, right? 5 analysts. That's a lot of people having to process a lot of information. Ideally, when they become expert enough, they can reduce it down to 2, but those have to be very experienced analysts before you can have 2, an eyes-on and then a screener products person. The eyes-on is literally in this full motion video case, staring at video constantly. Eyes-on meaning they cannot take their eyes off, and they just sit there and stare at it. Very fatiguing, as you might imagine. Very boring, which has its own thing on the physiological side. And then they kind of shout things out to the screener and products person is really 2 jobs combined into one, create the product and get it out to the field. So ideally, again, to get to that expert level, it takes a while. What we wanted to say is, okay, there's another lab at Air Force that's developing this advanced sensor system for SAR data, synthetic aperture radar data, which can collect just a massive amount of data. and just all of a sudden, and again, he's developing this great technology and where it can then give it to the analyst and say, oh yeah, this is a potential threat. This vehicle is acting suspicious and circle it as a potential threat. All that's automated, right? But how, my question was when he showed us this is, how is the analyst going to respond to that particular system, right? But again, the ideal is it can eventually reduce a 5-person PED down to a 2-person PED and have those people performing at that level before they have 10 years or 5 years of experience in, whatever it is to get them there. So again, that was my basic question, or that was the technology's basic assumption is that's what's going to happen. My basic research question here is how's it going to differ when we introduce that great system that's being developed, right? So we simulated this system and we put on a social kind of fabric to it again, and we either had it as a tool condition with just a technical focus, or again, similar to extending the lab studies, we had it where there were some social emotional cues to foster team dynamics. We went through the whole sense assess augment loop again, sensing we've got the physiological sensors, self-report, similar measures, behavioral and task, again, assess what are those constructs actually mean, what are we getting from that, and then augment. In this, we were very much interested in how we actually eventually get to emotion and stress management, trust repair, if we sense the trust is fluctuating. And this one, what you see highlighted here in red was the only thing we were able to actually do in this study. Engagement management, because we did have, oh, and I'm blanking on it, Marissa, do you remember the Connect sensor, where we and some great colleagues from Yale have developed an algorithm that can sense engagement depending on your body posture and what you're doing. Attention management and task augmentation. And then some of our outcome measures, again, the rapport, communication, those team dynamics again, trust and performance. Performance actually in this as well, we are not able to capture. Okay, so the participants, what you see here are the 2 actual analysts. These are experienced NASIC analysts right there, NASIC being our intelligence side. And what you see in the middle, which I know is hard to see, this is actually a virtual avatar, right? So a virtual analyst, Sergeant Rivers, those participants that again are experienced SMEs or subject matter experts, they are analysts, that they do this job every day. They come in there and they're told that it's set up as if they're going to have this, we're testing out this technology of the future, you know, it's in beta version, and you guys are going to have this machine partner that's going to help you out. And again, how we introduce it as more of a teammate versus more of just a standard tool. That's our manipulation in this condition. So because that technology doesn't really exist, we do a Wizard of Oz study to, again, simulate it. And by the way, the technology, that SAR data doesn't have this virtual avatar, that doesn't have the avatar face. That's what we were overlaying with that question is, does this matter, right? Does this matter if we introduce it with some kind of social effect, which a face itself is cueing some social factors there. So again, we can't actually do that right now. That doesn't exist. So we did a Wizard of Oz study, and literally like Wizard of Oz, this other very experienced analyst, this was Sergeant Lawton, was sitting behind a curtain, just like Wizard of Oz. And what you see there on like the right side of the screen is the facial capture system that we used. So that way everything that's being recorded is being spit right back out in real time to the analysts on the other side. And they can't hear him. They don't know that he's back there. One of the really great things about this, this software is that it allows us in the tool condition to mute, right? So even though he was following a pretty good script, his natural facial, because he is, again, social emotional himself, right? His natural features might fluctuate in the control condition where we didn't want that. So you were in that software, you're actually able to dial it down. So we had a really tight control there, which was great. One of the great things, again, that because he is an expert analyst and he knows what he's doing here, he could add that he gave that kind of meta-awareness of overall mission, which, again, a real human couldn't do, but he was looking at all these things and he knew what was going to happen. Again, a real analyst wouldn't have that, but you might imagine that, again, that advanced autonomous system of the future that's going to be aiding analysts in crunching all this massive amounts of SAR data, for example, or who knows what other data, right, might have that tremendous meta-awareness, and they need, that system somehow needs to get it to those analysts. So here are the results. Again, these are just our self-report results. We did a sign test as well. And again, we've got all this great physio data that we just need somebody to analyze, hopefully Monica. So anyway, what we see yet again in real analysts, right? Experienced people out there, not just university students, real analysts doing a job that they do every day, something very similar to their job, I should say. It was an exercise. We see yet again that those team process factors were higher: collaboration, team perception, rapport, communication, trust and trustworthiness also higher. Benevolence and ability being our trustworthiness measures there. And then here we see again, so again, at least some reverse direction, which no acquiescence, right? So we're seeing some good results there. That they perceive that the stress with the task at hand, again, not anything related to Sergeant Rivers, as we called him, but the stress was lower, all because how we introduced that technology and what we had them engage in that pre-task phase, right? Not just the task of the training of how you perform the task, hit X, hit Y, what have you, but again, how we're introducing them. Are we introducing them as our teammates? Because teammates mean something, and it means something very social. Again, we've got all this other great data that we hope to be able to analyze and find out more, and actually both the lab and the field study. So in conclusion, I think I probably did pretty good on time. We're really trying to get at that foundational scientific understanding and really generate some empirical evidence here of both the benefits but also the risks of the social cueing, right? Because we are developing these systems are going out there, but we're not always asking, is this good, is this bad? If it's bad, how do we mitigate that? If it's good, and if it's maybe a way that we can enhance collaboration and teaming with these systems without this tremendous cognitive, burdensome display where you have this and that going on. Maybe if I just cue you as a partner and then you're going to interact with it. Again, that's a much more easier, unconscious way to get into, improve that interaction, improve that performance without it always having to be on the system and some kind of design aspect on the system. So again, just really focusing on those non-technical skills, selection training, and again, that emotional management, social emotional management throughout, and really trying to understand the relationships of the future. And that is it. Thank you very much. Any questions? I'm going to get my water.
All right, so you talked right at the end about potential, I guess, downsides to a social system. Have you done a study, or are you thinking about a study where you have a social versus a tool introduction to your system, and then you have it give them wrong information? So can it lead someone astray where it wouldn't otherwise if the users feel like this is a person?
Oh wait, I'm sorry, say that again. I thought you were on the reliance of it essentially?
Right, does it cause you to over-rely?
Yeah, so that's a pretty common thing in the trust and autonomy literature where they manipulate the reliability of the system, right? Because we kind of call that trust calibration, right? So nice linear relationship assumed, right? Do I trust, do I over-trust it, do I under-trust it, right? If it's performing adequately and as it should, it's reliable. They usually manipulate reliability for this. Then I should trust it. But sometimes we call like complacency, right? It's like, I don't really feel like doing anything or what have you, or I'm just bored, so I'm just going to be complacent about it and rely on it. So yeah, there's a definite relationship that's all, optimal there, and people have manipulated that, we have in ourselves, but eventually that would be something to do. And if we don't do it, if somebody else would want to take that on to kind of investigate that in this particular realm would be great, because that's an important question.
Representative of the general population. In the second study, you put, I would like to know, how do you realize that there's a difference between sexes, men and women?
No, so we do have that, but it's a pretty small sample size. So in the survey data itself, we can't analyze, but there was a female analyst that we had on there.
Okay.
But hopefully in the behavioral data, we've got video, we've got speech patterns, we've got all of that. And again, if we can get that data analyzed, that might be something we can touch on, but we'd need a much larger sample size.
Because
to be able
probably
to
will
look
be
at that.
different.
I'm sorry?
Probably will be different
Yeah.
between, you know.
Do you have any, Marissa, from the Yale studies, do you have any anecdotal thoughts of the exit interviews on the male-female differences? Yeah. Yeah, but that's absolutely an important question, but again, just not something we were specifically looking at here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
All right, well, thank you. Anybody out in MITRE world, if you're still on, or everybody's probably gone?
Are there any
now? I don't
questions
know.
online? No?
Okay, thank
All
you.
right, well, thank you very much, Charlene. And thank you, Misha, as well. Those were great talks. And thank you, Joyce, for introduction. And and thank you, Mass Robotics. We're very happy to be part of this community. And we look forward to further engagements like this. Thank you. Did you want to? All right. And Russ Graves is going to say something.
I do just want to also thank Russ. I didn't thank him in the beginning, but we wouldn't still be at Mass Robotics if it wasn't for him.
So MITRE's very pleased to try to bring speakers in and also be able to get some speakers from down here in Boston and feed that back to our corporate offices down in McLean, Virginia, as well out as Bedford, Mass. So it's been great. Thank you, Charlene, for that. We're very pleased that we're able to engage here with Mass Robotics. MITRE, if you're not familiar with us, we're a non-for-profit. We manage federally funded research and development centers with the federal government. We support only the federal government and don't compete with industry. So a lot of our research, we have opportunities to partner and collaborate. And so this is a great venue to meet some of the organizations and startups and companies that are involved with robotics, and then be able to bring complementary research that we're doing or sponsor problems down to find those innovative solutions. And that's been one of our biggest efforts over the last few years, is to look at that consumer-driven innovations that are occurring and finding ways in which to bridge those into the federal government by either helping the startups or non-traditional companies that don't work with the federal government understand those hard problems, and then find ways to get them into the right programs and fielded within the government. So the more we can have some of our folks come and talk about those government challenges and areas where we could collaborate is a great opportunity for us. And the more we can hear about what's going on in the research community, at academia, as well as the startup companies and the technology that you have, helps us find ways in which we can either partner on that and collaborate, or bring that capability right into the federal government. So thanks for having us here, Tom and Joyce, and we look forward to doing it again in the future. Thanks, everyone.